They told you she was a monster. Snake hair, stone gaze, killed on sight. Perseus cut off her head and became a hero. Children read that story in classrooms. It appears in every mythology textbook. Disney made it exciting. Percy Jackson made it cool. Clash of the Titans made it epic. That's the story they gave you. Here's what they left out. Medusa didn't start with snakes in her hair. She started with the most beautiful hair in all of Greece. Men traveled from across the Mediterranean just to catch a glimpse of her. Poets wrote odes to her appearance. Gods noticed her from Olympus. One god in particular noticed her too much, and what he did to her inside Athena's own temple, in a place she thought was sacred, in a place specifically designed to protect the innocent, is the real beginning of the Medusa story. A story not about a monster. A story about what happens when a woman is violated by a god, abandoned by the goddess meant to protect her, punished for surviving, isolated for decades, murdered in her sleep, and then remembered for thousands of years as the villain. Perseus didn't slay a monster. He beheaded a victim, and the Greek myths recorded it as heroism. Stay with this video until the very end, because the final twist, what happened to Medusa's blood after Perseus killed her, will change how you see not just this story, but every Greek hero story you've ever heard. And if you want mythology that doesn't flinch from the dark parts, that goes where the textbooks refuse to go, subscribe to Lore Myth right now and hit the bell icon so you never miss what we uncover next. Let's go back to the very beginning. Before the snakes, before the stone gaze, before Perseus, before any of the versions you've seen on screen or read in books, Medusa was born mortal. That single fact changes everything about her story, and almost every modern retelling skips past it in the first sentence. She wasn't born a monster. She wasn't created by a god to serve as an obstacle for heroes. She wasn't a symbol of evil placed in the world to be conquered. She was a human woman, mortal, vulnerable, capable of pain and fear and love and death. She was one of 3 daughters born to the sea gods Phorcys and Ceto, 2 ancient deities who predated the Olympians and represented the deep primordial ocean. Her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were born immortal, 2 of the Gorgons who would outlive nearly everything in the Greek mythological world. But Medusa, the youngest, was born mortal. She alone among her sisters could be wounded. She alone could age. She alone could die. The Greeks were deliberate about this. They could have made all 3 sisters immortal. They chose not to. They made Medusa the vulnerable one. In the earliest accounts of her mythology, before Roman poet Ovid reshaped and popularized the story in his Metamorphoses around 8 AD, Medusa is described as a priestess of Athena, not a minor temple attendant, a devoted, dedicated servant of the goddess of wisdom and war. She had taken sacred vows of chastity, as Athena's priestesses were required to do. She had offered her life to the goddess's service. She lived in Athena's temple, performed the rituals, maintained the sacred spaces, and represented everything the goddess stood for: discipline, wisdom, devotion, purity. She was also, according to every source that mentions her before the transformation, extraordinarily beautiful. Not just attractive in the ordinary sense, the kind of beauty that made people stop mid-sentence, the kind that made travelers change their route to pass by her temple, the kind that poets referenced as a standard of comparison. Her hair, especially, was remarked on consistently: thick, lustrous, dark, and flowing. Multiple sources specifically single out her hair as her most celebrated feature. That hair becomes the central image of her punishment. But we'll get there. First, understand who she was before. A mortal woman of exceptional beauty, living a life of religious devotion, protected by sacred vows, serving one of the most powerful goddesses on Olympus, in a temple that was supposed to be inviolable. She had done everything right. Now understand what happened to her. Poseidon, god of the sea, brother of Zeus, one of the three supreme rulers of the Greek cosmos, saw Medusa and wanted her. The myths are not subtle about this. He didn't fall in love, he didn't court her. He didn't respect her vows or her position or the sacred nature of the space she occupied. He pursued her. Medusa ran. She had vows to keep, a goddess to serve, a temple to protect. She retreated to the one place she believed would be absolutely safe, the innermost sanctuary of Athena's temple, sacred ground, the holiest place available to her, a location that, by every rule of Greek religion, was untouchable. Poseidon followed her inside. He violated her inside Athena's temple. This is recorded in the myth. Ovid writes it. Earlier Greek sources reference it. This is not a dark interpretation or a modern reading. The ancient Greeks put this in their own story and kept telling it for centuries. A god assaulted a mortal priestess on sacred ground. Now here is where the story shows you exactly what kind of world ancient Greece was, and exactly what kind of theology the Greeks were building. Athena discovered what had happened in her temple. She did not punish Poseidon. He was her uncle, a supreme god, brother of Zeus. In the Greek divine hierarchy, punishing Poseidon for this was not something Athena could or would do. The Olympian power structure protected him completely. So Athena looked at Medusa and punished her instead. The transformation is described with horrible specificity in the ancient sources. Athena reached down and grabbed Medusa's celebrated hair, that thick, lustrous, beautiful hair that had been Medusa's most remarked upon feature, and turned every strand into a living serpent, writhing, hissing, perpetually moving, impossible to ignore or hide. She twisted Medusa's beautiful face into something terrible. The exact descriptions vary by source, but the consistent elements, eyes that now carried death in them, features distorted into the visage of a monster, a face that would make anyone who looked at it directly turn instantly to stone. At last, detail. The petrifying gaze deserves attention. It sounds like a power. It sounds almost like a weapon Athena gave Medusa to protect herself. But look at what it actually does to Medusa's life. She can never look at another living creature again without killing it. She can never have company. She can never be comforted, never be touched, never maintain eye contact with another person without destroying them. The power of her gaze is actually the most perfectly designed isolation sentence imaginable. Athena didn't give Medusa a weapon. She gave her a prison with no walls and no exit. Medusa was sent away. The myths don't describe a trial or a judgment or any process of justice. She was simply expelled, sent to live at the edge of the known world, in a remote place far from gods and humans alike. The specific location varies by source. Some say Libya, some say beyond the Western Ocean. Some say the farthest reaches of the earth where night and day blur together. Wherever it was, she went there alone, and she stayed there. Think about what that means. A mortal woman. Remember, she was mortal. She felt everything. Who did nothing wrong, who followed every rule, who dedicated her life to religious service, who retreated to the holiest place she knew when a god pursued her, is now living alone at the edge of the world, surrounded by the stone statues of every bird, animal, and creature that accidentally met her gaze, unable to look at the sky without worrying what flies through it, unable to walk near water without seeing her own monstrous reflection, The myths don't give us a timeline. She could have been there for years, decades. The Greek sources simply don't say. They move quickly from her transformation to Perseus, skipping over the vast, silent span of time that Medusa spent alone in her stone garden at the edge of existence. That silence is worth sitting with, because that is the real horror of Medusa's story, not the snake hair, not the petrifying gaze, the loneliness, the endless, undeserved isolation of a woman who was punished for being victimized. If you're feeling the weight of that and you want more mythology told this honestly, subscribe to Lore Myth right now, turn on notifications, and make sure you're here for every new video. We don't sanitize these stories. We tell them the way the ancients actually wrote them. Now let's talk about the hero. Perseus is one of Greek mythology's most celebrated figures, son of Zeus, who visited his mortal mother Danae in a shower of golden light. Raised in poverty after his grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, threw his mother and infant Perseus into the sea in a wooden chest to prevent a prophecy that Perseus would one day kill him. Perseus survived. He grew up on the island of Seriphus, raised by a fisherman named Dictys, and eventually came to the attention of King Polydectes, who wanted to marry Perseus's mother and found Perseus himself to be an inconvenient obstacle. So Polydectes set a trap. During a feast, he declared that every guest owed him a gift, specifically a horse. Perseus, who had no horse and no money, rashly announced he would bring whatever Polydectes wanted instead. Polydectes smiled. He said he wanted the head of Medusa. It was meant to be a death sentence. Polydectes expected Perseus to die trying to find her. But Perseus had something Polydectes didn't account for: divine favor. The gods equipped him. Hermes gave him winged sandals so he could fly. Hades gave him a helm of invisibility. The Hesperides gave him a special bag that could safely contain Medusa's head. And Athena gave him a perfectly polished bronze shield, smooth as a mirror, that he could use to see Medusa's reflection without meeting her gaze directly. Pause on that last detail again. Athena, the goddess who transformed Medusa into a monster as punishment for being assaulted in Athena's own temple, now personally equips the hero being sent to behead her. She gives Perseus the exact tool that will allow him to kill the woman she already destroyed. This is in the myth. The ancient Greeks wrote this and kept telling the story. Athena is both the cause of Medusa's suffering and the architect of her death. The same divine hand that turned beautiful hair into snakes now hands a young hero the mirror that lets him approach her safely. What does that tell you about Athena? About Greek divine justice? About who the mythology was designed to serve? Perseus flew to the edge of the world. He found the Gray, 3 ancient sisters who shared one eye and one tooth between them, and stole their eye, forcing them to tell him how to find Medusa. He found her. The myths describe what he saw: a cave or an open space at the world's edge, littered with statues, not artworks. People and animals turned to stone. The ground was full of them, some mid-motion, frozen in the act of fleeing, some with their faces twisted in expressions of terror or awe. Medusa's entire surrounding landscape was made of the accidental victims of her cursed gaze. And Medusa was there, asleep. This is a detail that rarely makes it into the heroic retellings. Perseus didn't face Medusa in combat. He didn't look her in the eye and triumph through superior willpower or strength. He crept up on her while she was sleeping, watched her reflection in his mirrored shield, raised his sword, and cut off her head while she was unconscious. He murdered her in her sleep. The mythology calls it a heroic feat. Perseus is praised throughout ancient Greek literature for this deed. Cities minted coins with Medusa's severed head to commemorate his victory. Her beheaded image became one of the most recognizable symbols of Greek civilization. But strip away the language of heroism and look at what actually happened. A mortal woman was assaulted by a god, punished by a goddess for being assaulted, exiled to the edge of the world alone, spent an indeterminate stretch of years living in isolation, surrounded by accidental victims of a curse she never asked for, and was then murdered in her sleep by a young man who needed her head as a gift. That is the plot of Medusa's story. Now here is where the myth introduces its most unexpected element, the detail that almost every version skips, the detail that reveals how much more complex this story actually is. When Perseus's sword severed Medusa's neck, two beings burst fully formed from the wound. The first was Chrysaor, a giant warrior wielding a golden sword, born fully grown and fully armed. His name means he who has a golden sword. He appears briefly in Greek myth, fathering a monstrous son called Geryon, who Heracles later kills. He is, in almost every sense, a minor figure. He disappears from mythology almost immediately after being born. But his existence tells us something enormous. Medusa had been pregnant. She had been carrying Poseidon's children this entire time, through her transformation, through her exile, through every decade alone at the edge of the world. She had been pregnant with the children of the god who attacked her, unable to give birth because she was immortalized in her cursed state, carrying that pregnancy for however long she lived in isolation. And she never told anyone, because there was no one to tell. The second being that emerged from Medusa's severed neck was Pegasus, the winged horse, one of the most beloved, most celebrated, most recognizable creatures in all of Greek and world mythology. The symbol of poetic inspiration, divine freedom, the connection between the earthly and the divine, the horse that carried heroes, and that struck its hoof on the ground and created the spring of the muses, that eventually became a constellation in the sky. Pegasus, born from the wound of a murdered victim. The creature that represents transcendence and beauty in Greek mythology was literally born from the neck of a woman being beheaded after spending years alone as punishment for being assaulted. The Greeks took something born directly from violence, injustice, and suffering, and made it the symbol of artistic inspiration and divine connection. What does that say about where beauty and greatness actually come from in the Greek worldview? What does it say about what they believed about suffering and creation? Perseus caught Pegasus, some myths say, though other versions say Pegasus immediately flew away to Olympus and wasn't caught until later. He placed Medusa's head in the divine bag, careful not to look at it directly, and he flew away from the edge of the world with the head of a murdered woman as his prize. He used that head throughout the rest of his adventures. He pointed it at the sea monster Cetus to rescue Andromeda. He pointed it at the Titan Atlas and turned him into a mountain range. He pointed it at Polydectes himself, the king who sent him on the quest, and turned the entire royal court to stone. Medusa's curse, the punishment inflicted on her by Athena, became Perseus's most powerful weapon. Her suffering was literally his toolkit. Even after death, Medusa served someone else's story. If Medusa's murder while pregnant and alone is sitting with you heavily right now, that means you're paying attention. Subscribe to Lore Myth and hit the notification bell. Because next, we're going into the Greek myths they built entire civilizations on, while carefully ignoring what those myths actually say. The story doesn't end with Perseus flying home. There is one final detail in Medusa's mythology that is so strange, so specific, and so rarely included in modern retellings that most people, who consider themselves knowledgeable about Greek myth if never heard it. As Perseus flew over Libya carrying Medusa's severed head in his bag, drops of her blood fell. They fell through the sky, through the air, onto the North African desert below. And from each drop of blood, a viper was born. Not metaphorical vipers, real serpents, actual physical snakes, the venomous species that have populated the Libyan desert and North Africa ever since. According to the Greek myth, every venomous snake in North Africa exists because Medusa's blood touched the ground when Perseus flew over with her head. Think about the full arc of that. Medusa was punished by having her beautiful hair transformed into snakes. She was turned into something people associated with serpents and fear. She was isolated, alone, surrounded by death. And when she was finally killed, her very blood generated more snakes, thousands of them, spreading across a continent, persisting through generations. The woman turned into a snake-haired monster becomes, in death, the literal mother of snakes. Her transformation never ended. Not even death stopped it. She keeps creating the things she was punished by being associated with. The snakes that came from her punishment became the snakes that came from her blood, became the snakes that outlive every hero who ever lived. Perseus died. Athena eventually faded as active worship declined. The Greek gods retreated from the world. But the snakes, Medusa's descendants in mythological terms, are still there. Now let's talk about what this myth actually meant. Because the ancient Greeks were sophisticated, they knew exactly what they were encoding in these stories. They didn't write mythology carelessly. The first major interpretation comes from classical scholarship. So Medusa represents the earlier pre-Olympian religion of ancient Greece. Before the Indo-European Greeks arrived and installed the Olympian pantheon, the indigenous peoples of the Mediterranean worshipped goddess-centered religions where powerful female divine figures, often represented with serpents as symbols of wisdom and rebirth, were central. The Gorgon face, wide-eyed, serpent-framed, terrifyingly powerful, appears in pre-Greek art across the Mediterranean as a divine protective symbol. It was the face of the goddess herself. Look upon it and be struck by divine power. When the Olympian patriarchal pantheon replaced these older religions, what happened to the goddess with the powerful face and the serpents? She became a monster. The symbol of divine female power was turned into something men could conquer. Perseus beheading Medusa in this reading is a mythological retelling of one culture destroying another culture's central deity and celebrating it as heroism. The image of Medusa's head that Perseus used to turn enemies to stone was originally used the same way in Greek art, as a protective, apotropaic symbol, placed on shields and temple walls to ward off evil. The Greeks took the sacred symbol of a conquered religion, turned it into a monster's face, then used that face as a weapon. They killed the goddess. Then they weaponized her corpse. The second major interpretation focuses on Athena's role, specifically why Athena punished Medusa instead of Poseidon. Some scholars argue this wasn't irrationality or injustice, but a theological reality the Greeks were consciously recording. Athena, goddess of wisdom, knew perfectly well that punishing Poseidon was impossible. He was too powerful, too protected, too embedded in the Olympian hierarchy. So she did what the powerful do when justice is impossible upward. She directed the punishment downward. Medusa paid for what Poseidon did because Medusa was the only one who could be made to pay. The Greeks weren't condemning this, they were documenting it. This was how divine power worked in their theology. The powerful were protected by their power, and the vulnerable paid for proximity to the powerful. Athena punishing Medusa was, in this reading, the myth acknowledging that divine justice was never truly just. It was just power operating on those with less of it. The third interpretation is the most modern and perhaps the most uncomfortable. Medusa is a mirror. Every culture that has told her story, Greek, Roman, medieval, Renaissance, and modern, has used her to reflect its own anxieties about powerful women. When powerful women in art are depicted with Medusa's image, it means something different in every era. In ancient Greece, she's the dangerous female to be conquered. In Renaissance art, she's ambiguous, sometimes tragic. In 20th century feminist theory, she's reclaimed as a symbol of female power and rage. In contemporary pop culture, she appears everywhere. Tattoos, album covers, fashion, activism. She is never just a monster. She is always a question. What do you do with a woman who has been given power by her suffering? What do you do with someone whose wound has become a weapon? Perseus's answer was to take that weapon, to use her curse for his own victories while she lay dead. And the myths honored him for it for 3,000 years. Here is the final twist. Medusa is the most frequently depicted figure in all of ancient Greek art, more than Zeus, more than Athena, more than Heracles. The Gorgon face appears on more surviving Greek artifacts than any other single image. They put her face on shields, on coins, on temple pediments, on pottery, on armor, on the walls of public buildings, on jewelry, on lamps and cooking vessels and children's toys. They put the face of the monster they celebrated killing on everything. Why? Because the Gorgonian, Medusa's face, was an apotropaic symbol. It warded off evil. It protected the object it was placed on. The most powerful protective image in Greek material culture was the face of a woman they mythologized as a monster. They killed her in the story. They used her face as protection in real life. That paradox is at the center of everything Medusa represents. She is simultaneously the monster, the victim, the weapon, and the protector. She is the sacred image that became a cautionary tale, that became a murder story, that became the most reproduced protective symbol in Greek civilization. She never was just a monster. She was always all of those things at once. And today, she's still everywhere. More people have Medusa tattoos than any other figure from Greek mythology. She appears on Versace's logo. The fashion house chose her face as their symbol of beauty and power, deliberately reclaiming the image from its monstrous framing. Contemporary artists, writers, and musicians regularly use her as a symbol of survival, of transformation, of what happens when you survive something that was supposed to destroy you. The woman the myths tried to contain in a cave at the edge of the world has spent 3,000 years escaping containment. Percy Jackson gave her sunglasses and made her a minor obstacle. The real Medusa is something far more enduring, a story that refuses to be summarized as monster gets slain, no matter how many times people try. Because the more carefully you read it, the more the monster looks like the only person in the story who never actually did anything wrong. And the hero looks like a young man who beheaded a pregnant woman in her sleep because a king told him to. Before this video ends, 3 things. Hit that like button if Medusa's real story landed differently than any version you've seen before. These videos take serious research, and every like tells the algorithm that Mythology Told honestly deserves to reach more people. Subscribe to Lore Myth and turn on all notifications. We're building a complete library of mythology's most uncomfortable truths. The stories that shaped civilizations and got sanitized into bedtime versions that strip out everything that actually mattered. Drop a comment below with this question. Who was the real villain of Medusa's story? Poseidon, who attacked her. Athena, who punished her. or Perseus who beheaded her? There's no wrong answer, but your answer reveals a lot about what you think justice actually means. I read every comment. Best debate picks the next myth. Until next time, remember this. The next time you see Medusa's face, on a shield, on a coin, on someone's skin, on a luxury handbag, remember that image was not designed to show you a monster. It was designed to show you something so powerful that evil would look at it and run. They took a woman. They gave her the face of fear. They killed her for it. And then they put her face on everything they wanted to protect. She's been protecting them ever since.